All right, welcome to day number 7 on 100 Days to Code for Nautobot. We're going to go over 3 days because they're very short. One's going over the actual REST API and how it interacts with Nautobot Jobs. Nautobot uses Django REST Framework to provide the web APIs, and it can be used to trigger Nautobot Jobs, which is what I did in one of the jobs that I did for a company ones, and I think we'll go over it later in another video. And then we'll go over job scheduling and job approvals. So in the actual, your Nautobot deployment, when you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll have some of these tabs down here. And GraphQL, awesome to use. Ginger Render, awesome to use. But for the sake of this, we'll just use the API. And this is where you'll see the Swagger documentation or the API documentation. And this is where you can interact and actually see all of your actual endpoints and what they do. So if I go to something like device types, you can see all the filters and all the parameters really you can pass to this API. And then you can also do, try it out button, and you can actually, see what it would actually return and actually test out whatever it is you're trying to work on. So in this case, I can go into something that says, device type, device is null, true, and I can just scroll all the way to the bottom and then hit execute. And this is where it will actually execute the API. It gives you here the curl command. This is the request URL, and then it'll give you here the actual response body as well as the response headers down here. And the cool thing with this is with the actual request URL, you can actually type it up here and actually see the complete response, right? And this is useful because sometimes when it's a lot of data, it's very hard to see here. Yes, you can copy it, and yes, you can download it, but when you paste it here, it actually has pages, and you can kind of go through the actual payload and kind of see things differently. A cool thing to do is if you hit or change your depth and you go to something like depth 0, you'll see that it doesn't nest and get as much of the serialized information from with objects within objects. So in this case, manufacturer stops at the ID, object type, and the URL of this object. So if I want to go see that manufacturer, the URL is there for me, where I can actually do something with it. So if I go to that, there's the URL. This is the actual object with the object ID for the manufacturer one. Same thing up here. You can just get the ID itself. If I want to get a lot of information, I can increase the depth, let's say 2, and then I'll get more information, right? Display Arista, natural slug, name Arista, and description, when it was created, last updated, notes URL, and you can use this information to go to the notes URL and either use the IP, click here, and you can see there's no notes here. But if I were to actually go here into the manufacturer, which is the Arista, and I go into devices, manufacturer, Arista, and I'll go to notes. This is a note, and now there's a note created. And I go back to the same Arista endpoint that I had, you'll see that my note is now here. And you can actually see, the user that wrote it and the actual note payload or what I actually wrote, which is this is a note. So it's a way for you to get information and kind of go down um, further information if that's what you're kind of looking for. I wouldn't recommend you using Dep2 all the time, especially if it's a lot of data because it returns a lot of extra data that you might not necessarily need. So if you just want something quick and you're not really working with manufacturers and you just want, as very little data as possible, just make that 0 and then you'll get only enough information of it. But it's a very cool place to go, this documentation or this actual, API docs and play around and seeing all the endpoints. When you create your own custom ones, you can actually see the actual parameters or filters and see if you're actually doing or actually coding them correctly and see if what you actually want as a parameter is actually working as intended by either using your browser or using it here in the tryout button. So that's kind of the overview of this. There's a lot of endpoints, a lot to do, but it's a very cool place to kind of come in here and kind of do a quick check and a quick, play around with the actual APIs that you have. Now, for the job section, when you come into the jobs, if a job does not have sensitive variables, if you scroll to the bottom, this is where you'll have the actual scheduling of jobs. You can do it once in the future, hourly, daily, weekly, or custom. Custom is an actual cron syntax. So you will pass in something like this and you can, customize it to exactly the time frame that you want or exactly the interval that you want based on the cron syntax. In our case, we'll just do once run immediately. This job has the approval required, hence why this has a little message down here. So I do request to run job. This gets sent to the job approval queue, right? So I will hit deny just for now, and I will go back to the job, and I will schedule it once in the future, and I will call it test run, and I will run it for tomorrow. So if I request to schedule it, it doesn't come out in the scheduled jobs. It's still pending approval, right? And since I'm the requester, I'm signed in as admin. If I try to approve it, I'm going to get an error, right? Because you cannot approve your own job request. It's almost, like if you're giving yourself an override of, you know, information. It wouldn't make sense, and it's not allowed. Um, so if I switch users and I go into this test user that I created, and I finally go into jobs and I go to the queue, then I can hit the approve button. Then it gets approved, and now it shows up in my schedule jobs. And now it's the job is here. Once in the future, if I click on it, it will tell me, okay, this was approved at this time. It was approved by this user. And when is it running? It's running in the future. Is it a one off? Yes. This is when it's going to start. And these are the user inputs that are going to be given for this job. So when you are going to schedule a job, the variables that you select here and run it weekly or daily, that's what's going to be inputted in the job and being used over and over again. So you have to be careful with that. But other than these three things, that would be it for this video. It's a very short video. The next video, we're going to start looking at some of these other jobs and kind of going from there. So thank you so much for watching.